Hello. We all live in a world of our own worries and problems. Sometimes we don't even pay attention to what's going on outside our windows. But sometimes you should be more careful, because the darkness can be very close and lie in wait for you. The next story is about this. If you're ready, then perhaps we'll begin. Stonehap, a town where nothing happens. Stonehap is a picturesque town in Colorado, surrounded by national parks and reserves. Has always been a place where tourists and lovers of natural beauty flocked, and people simply came here in search of peace, quiet, and tranquility. There was no crime here, everyone knew each other, and even the police were more involved in settling neighborly disputes than in real investigations. Beautiful, quiet streets, like from a picture, and eternal competitions of housewives for the most beautiful garden areas. The main attraction of this town was the old church of St. Michael the Archangel, a majestic building built at the beginning of the 19th century. According to history, it was the church that was the first building around which the current Stonehap was eventually built. Another notable fact was that this church was partially built into the lower reaches of a small mountain, which the locals called the Sacred Wall. When Father Jonathan, who had served as a pastor for many years, suddenly died of a heart attack, a new priest was appointed in his place, Father Gabriel. He was young, friendly, and full of energy. His sermons inspired people, and especially local unmarried women, who became frequent guests in his parish. After all, the young father was also incredibly attractive, which did not escape the ladies' eyes. Of course, in addition to his charm, he was a very talented person who attracted people to himself. Therefore, soon the church was filled with parishioners again. With his arrival, the city was filled with even more light and energy, at least that's what the townspeople thought. One fine and unremarkable winter day, everything changed for the town of Stonehap, a place filled with smiling adults and laughing children, where the biggest crime was the theft of a couple of bottles of beer by one not-so-young lover of relaxation, was suddenly shaken by the news that was on everyone's lips within half an hour. A girl named Lucy, 9 years old, had gone missing. Her parents were beside themselves. Local authorities organized search parties, and her photographs were hung on every pole and building. The whole town, as one, rose to help. Days passed, then weeks, but the girl was never found. As sometimes happens, the parents waited for at least a call demanding ransom, in the hope that she was still alive. But that never happened. The only consolation in the current situation was the Church and the Holy Father, with words of support and inexhaustible faith. Time passed, and as soon as everyone accepted what had happened, another disappearance of a child became a new shock. Everything was the same as with the first girl. Again, horror, misunderstanding, and confusion. Unfortunately, this child was not the last. 3 more children simply disappeared. The local police did everything in their power, but the investigation was in a dead end from the very beginning. After all, no evidence or anything that could help was found. The once lively city, full of smiles and light, was plunging into despondency and fear. Parents did not leave their children for a second, terrified at the thought that their child could be next. Every new month, children disappeared, and this perhaps was the only fact uniting this series of pain and tragedy. 2. The Blake family. Alex Blake, his wife Sarah, and their 9-year-old daughter Emily came to Stonehap for the summer holidays. They rented a cozy house near the reserve, surrounded by dense forest and streams flowing down from the mountains. Alex was once an FBI agent who retired early due to an injury he received on the job. He knew how to conduct investigations, how to analyze information, how to see details that others ignore. Even after his well-deserved rest, his colleagues did not leave him alone and often asked for help. His methods, extraordinary abilities, and instinct always gave results, and 100% solve rate. In the first days of his vacation, he enjoyed time with his family, walks by the lake, barbecues in the backyard, games with his daughter, beautiful sunsets in his arms with his wife. Everything was perfect. But soon he began to notice something strange. People sometimes behaved somehow unnaturally. Tensed smiles and standard phrases devoid of sincerity. Everyone seemed to avoid conversations and did not want to contact anyone once again. Even the inherent curiosity about new people was absent. Everyone kept to themselves. This made him think that something was wrong here. One day, sitting over a cup of coffee in a local cafe, he heard conversations about missing children. Alex asked those present nearby what this story was. Everyone pretended to be in a hurry. Having received no answer, the former FBI agent went to the local police station. There, everyone answered evasively and reluctantly. He was given to understand that this was none of his business, which was true. The newspapers wrote about it superficially. It seemed that everyone was pretending that nothing was happening. Having approached the family, he shared his thoughts with his wife. She advised him not to pay attention. "You are no longer on duty, dear. This is a problem for the local authorities, not yours. Let's just enjoy the vacation," added Sarah. Alex thought for a second, but still listened to his wife, and decided to let the situation go. A few days later, the family's life turned upside down. Their daughter Emily went missing. It happened on a quiet evening. Emily was riding her pink bike with ribbons fluttering in the wind along the city street. Alex was sitting in a chair on the porch, rocking with a cup of coffee and watching her. She smiled and waved to her dad, then turned the corner, and he never saw her again. Usually, at this point, the girl turned around and rushed to meet her dad again, ringing the bell and a charming smile on her face. But when she didn't appear after a few minutes, Alex realized something had happened. The first thought that came to his mind was that his little girl had fallen and, God forbid, hurt herself. He jumped up and ran to the turn, but his daughter was not there. Thinking that she might have just decided to go around the street, he ran around the block but still did not see Emily. An unusual panic began to take hold of him. Trying his best to remain calm, Alex called his wife, hoping that she had simply returned home. But Emily was not home. When he returned, he tried to calm his wife down and called the police. Sarah was shaking in hysterics. The officers arrived fairly quickly, listened to the parents' statements, inspected the house but found nothing. No bicycle, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the girl had disappeared into thin air. Usually, in such situations, law enforcement officers try to calm down relatives and friends. They say that nothing terrible has happened yet. Maybe the child was distracted by something or was just walking. Or maybe she just saw a bunny on the outskirts of the forest, for example, and decided to stop and play with it, and things like that. But not this time and not in this place. There was only helplessness in the eyes of the police. "We'll do our best, Mr. Blake," the sheriff said, his eyes downcast. But Alex seemed to know that they wouldn't do anything and that he had to take matters into his own hands. Having drugged his wife with sedatives, he got into the car and drove through the city streets in search of his daughter. He still had some hope that he would be able to find her. Having driven through the entire city and its outskirts, every alley and small parks where children usually spent their time and played, Mr. Blake began combing the forest paths and lawns that stretched along Stonehap. To his regret, no traces were found. Slightly desperate, he stopped to drink coffee and catch his breath a little. He thought and thought, going over all the possible versions in his head. People around him looked at him with tears in their eyes, but did not dare to talk to him. Then he remembered the conversations about children disappearing with a certain periodicity and decided to try to move in this direction, and there was no other option because he drove around every corner, but there was no result. Alex started by collecting all the newspaper news about missing children that were in the local library archives, as well as internet articles and notes on social networks. So he learned that there were 5 of them in the last 6 months, and if you take into account his daughter, she was the 6th. All of them were from well-off families, about the same age as Emily, with a frequency of 1 month. They disappeared in different parts of the city, and there were no witnesses. There were only photographs of children, articles with stories of desperate parents in horror, reports of search groups, and police interviews with endless regrets of relatives. Realizing that there was very little information here and nothing to cling to, Mr. Blake went to the sheriff's station. He showed his ID, a former FBI employee, and asked to meet him, to give him access to all the materials that they have about the missing children. He said that he could perhaps not only help in the search for his child, but also find out what really happened to the others. The local sheriff turned out to be a very good man, who was genuinely worried about what had happened, and was glad to receive any help, especially from a man with so much experience. He gave his colleague everything they had, all the reports, photos from the places where the children were supposedly last seen, testimonies from parents, search groups, and so on. Alex immersed himself in the papers and began to look at everything very carefully, since at first glance there really were no leads. But he believed that there should be at least something, some little thing that could have been missed. Having spent almost a day without sleep or rest, one detail still caught his attention. In the photographs of the places where the children disappeared, he noticed strange signs, barely noticeable, which could be confused with an ordinary stain, but still. Sometimes on the wall of a house, sometimes on a tree, sometimes on the asphalt, barely noticeable symbols that were not very clearly visible, even when the image was enlarged. Nevertheless, if you look closely, you can see something that looked like runes. They did not belong to any known religion or culture and looked strange, but he had to see them to verify his find. Mr. Blake went to the places where these strange disappearances supposedly occurred. He made copies of the photographs and began to look for the symbols he noticed. And indeed one sign was found on each of them, small in size as if burned by fire, which accordingly did not allow them to disappear over time. Assuming that there was a certain pattern here, Alex took pictures and went to the nearest store. He bought a map of the city and began to mark on it the points where the symbols were found. But so far this did not tell him anything. Mr. Blake decided to go back to the library and look for the meaning of what he saw. After reviewing thousands of images, he finally saw something similar. In ancient church writings, occult rituals were mentioned. There was similar symbolism. Then he decided to connect the places on the map and see what would come of it. Without expecting it, a pentagonal star appeared before his eyes, in the center of which was the place where his daughter had disappeared. Alex got into the car and rushed to that very turn. He did not want to believe it, but he had to check everything. Having arrived at the place and carefully examined every centimeter, a sign similar to the others was found on the edge of the curb. The man seemed to be speechless. His legs and arms could not move, because at that moment the realization came to him that his Emily had become the 6th victim of these inexplicable disappearances that defied any logic and common sense. The initial shock of realizing what was happening had passed, and Alex, having pulled himself together, began to look for solutions and clues with even greater zeal and pressure. that could lead him to the possibility of finding his daughter. Processing in his head everything that he had learned during his investigation, he realized that all the missing children, except for his girl, had one more thing in common. They attended Sunday school at St. Michael's Church. Mr. Blake went there, hoping to get answers to his many questions. After all, one way or another, everything pointed to a religious subtext in what happened, and local law enforcement agencies were unlikely to know the answers to them. In the church, he met Father Gabriel and told him about his grief. How terrible it is to lose your child. I have already heard about it. The parishioners told me about this tragedy, the priest said, sighing. I pray for all of them every day. Alex looked at him carefully. Gabriel spoke the right words, trying to instill hope and faith in a positive outcome. But there was no sincere sympathy in his eyes, as it seemed to him. Did you notice anything strange? Maybe the children complained about something before they disappeared, since they were with you every weekend. No, the pastor answered, pausing. Nothing like that happened. Everyone behaved as usual, and did not say anything like that. Otherwise, I would have definitely noticed it. A lie, Alex thought to himself. Something is wrong with him. I don't like his look, and his body says otherwise. Then Mr. Blake showed the priest photographs with occult symbols and a map with a star. Do you know what this could mean? Perhaps you notice people among the parishioners who behaved unnaturally or did similar things in the past, he asked. At that moment, it seemed to him that the Holy Father became a little nervous. Gabriel began to rub his fingertips, skillfully hiding them under the long sleeves of his cassock. I know nothing about this. Perhaps you should seek help from a more experienced, wiser, and older clergyman than me, a man of a certain circle and rank. But unfortunately, you will not find such a person in our city. You should go to Rockville. It is 200 miles from here. There is a very old church with a huge archive where you can find the information you need, Gabriel said. Alex caught a glimpse of the Holy Father's hands. The fingertips were scorched with something that aroused even more suspicion. He felt that something was wrong with him. There was a feeling that they wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. But so far he could not prove anything. Mr. Blake thanked the Holy Father for the time he had devoted to him. Gabriel crossed him, and with the words, "Go with God, my son," disappeared into the far room. At night, Alex returned to the church. The intuitive feeling that strange things were happening here did not leave him for a minute. Every cell in his body seemed to be pulling him there. It was necessary to check everything. First, he walked around the church grounds from the outside, trying to find a spare entrance or something like that. Having examined everything down to the millimeter, nothing caught his eye. Then Mr. Blake decides to go inside and study everything in detail, because he knew that in old buildings, especially like this one, there are always secret passages. Alex stood in the middle of St. Michael's Church, illuminating the ancient walls and partitions between them with a flashlight. There was silence around, only the barely audible crackling of church candles in the distance and the light creaking of the wooden floor under his feet. He felt an uncharacteristic anxiety, as if the air here was saturated with something alien. The man had never experienced such emotions in a church before, even when he was here in the same place during the day. He walked along the central aisle, carefully examining the floor. Churches like this, with a history of more than 200 years, are sure to keep many secrets in their walls, hidden from human eyes. There must be a secret passage somewhere here. Finally, his attention was drawn to a massive panel behind the altar. At first glance, it was simply an integral part of it, but its edges diverged slightly. Alex crouched down and ran his fingers along the crack. The wood was smoother than the rest of the surface, as if it had been touched or pulled from side to side often, and a barely perceptible draft was blowing from it. He began to look for a mechanism or some kind of button to move it. He remembered that in old buildings, especially at the time of the construction of this church, they often use levers hidden in statues or on the walls. Examining the altar more closely, he noticed something odd. One of the candlesticks looked much older than the others. He pulled it down. There was a dull click. The wooden panel behind the altar slowly slid to the side, revealing a dark opening like a descent into hell. A musty smell came from inside, the smell of old stone and something else, metallic, sweetish, reminiscent of the smell of blood. Alex took out a pistol and a flashlight, took a deep breath, and began to descend. The stairs went down deep, about 3 meters. The walls around were made of rough, unhewn stone, covered with traces of moisture, moss, and mold. Old holders with torches rising from them hung on them. They were still warm to the touch. So someone was here, Mr. Blake thought to himself. Perhaps I will find answers to my questions in this place. The air became heavier, with an admixture of something putrid. When he stepped onto the stone floor of the basement, the flashlight picked out from the darkness rows of very old wooden cages. They were so ancient that they were almost rotten with time, but some of them looked quite reinforced and much newer than the others at first glance. Alex came closer and realized that there was something inside. What he saw shocked him. On the wall was the corpse of a child. His arms, neck, and legs were tied with a thick rope. The whole picture reminded him of the crucifixion of Christ. In addition, the body was covered with a thick layer of wax, everything except the head. The skull was covered with skin, the eyes were sunken, the mouth was open in a silent scream, and on the wrists and neck there were rough and oblong cuts. Alex clenched his teeth, covered his mouth with his hand, and closed his eyes, forcing himself to look away from such a terrible and horrific picture. He felt wild fear and shock. His mind could not fit what had surfaced before his eyes. He walked around the cages one by one. In some of them, the same bodies of children, crucified on the walls with bloody streaks that had frozen, dried with time. In others, just bloody footprints, as if someone was dragged along the floor. There were 5 of them, the same number as the missing children. In some of them, he saw features similar to the photographs he had seen in the police reports. 3 heads were almost unrecognizable, as the degree of decomposition was too great. But when he reached the end of the corridor, his heart sank and almost burst from horror. A girl with disheveled blonde hair croaked, "Help!" Alex came closer, looked closely, and saw his daughter. She was hanging on the wall like the other children, completely immobilized by a wax shell. Blood was streaming from her wrists, a barely visible thread, flowing into old church bowls on the floor. Her face was deathly pale, her eyes were huge, filled with horror. He pressed himself against the bars, trying to push her out of place with the weight of his body, but nothing worked. "Everything will be fine, honey. It's me, your dad. I'll get you out of here. Do you know where the keys are? Can you tell me?" "He has," Emily whispered. "Who has?" But before he could get an answer, a voice rang out, eerie, as if the devil himself was standing behind him. "I knew you'd come here." Mr. Blake. Alex spun around, raising his gun. Father Gabriel stood in the doorway. The light from the lantern illuminated his face, and Alex went cold. The priest's eyes were black, completely black, without whites, without pupils. His face seemed elongated, as if his bones had changed shape. His skin had acquired an unhealthy grayish tint. In his hands he held a long knife with a strange blade covered in engraved symbols, similar to those at the places where the children had disappeared. "You don't understand," he said, tilting his head as if studying Alex. These children are the keys. Their blood will open the gates. These are not murders. These are sacrifices. This is service to a higher power. Gates? What gates? Where? Gabriel smiled and laughed unnaturally for a human, then growled, "To where I came from." "You're crazy," said Alex, slowly moving to the side. "Ilayen, I am eternity, a power you don't even know about." Alex took aim. "Let go of my daughter, or I'll kill you, do you hear?" "You can try," smirked the priest. At that very moment, a bell rang in the church above. Alex took a step back, preparing to shoot, but Gabriel was faster. With a wild cry, he rushed forward. Alex barely managed to dodge to the side. The knife missed his chest by a centimeter and got stuck in the wall. The gun fell from his hands, rolling along the stone floor. Gabriel hit him in the stomach, knocking the air out, and Alex fell to his knees. "You came here at the wrong time, Mr. Blake," the priest hissed, pulling the knife out of the stone wall. "The ritual is not yet complete, but never mind, you will be an excellent spectator. You will be honored to be a part of this great day." Alex rolled sharply to the side, grabbed a piece of rotten wood from the floor and plunged it into the priest's chest. He howled like a wild animal, but did not fall. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," he croaked, yanking the piece of wood out of his body. There was no blood. It seemed that what stood before him was not a person at all, but something that defied common sense. Alex realized that there was no time. Every second of hesitation was fraught with death. He rushed to the cage in which Emily was sitting and tore the knife from his belt. "Dad," the girl croaked. "Hold on, honey." He inserted the blade between the bars and began to forcefully tear apart the old wooden crossbars. A hoarse laugh was heard behind him. Gabriel was walking towards him again, holding a bloody knife in his hands. Before he could break the last crossbar, a furious force threw him aside again. Alex bent over in pain, but there was no time to hesitate. He looked ahead and saw his pistol. Crawling, barely moving, he reached out and abruptly grabbed the weapon. In a couple of seconds, the entire clip was in the priest's chest, and the body fell dead on the stone floor. Mr. Blake understood that it was unlikely to stop him for long. Looking around, he saw an old stone sarcophagus, the lid of which was moved. Without wasting time, Alex, with the last of his strength, dragged the body inside and closed it. Having broken the last crossbar of the cage where Emily was, and opening it, he began to tear off the lumps of wax in which her body was wrapped, not giving the girl the opportunity to even move. Having cut the ropes, Alex grabbed his daughter in his arms, turned around and ran forward, without looking back to the stairs that led up. Behind him, Gabriel's wild and piercing scream was heard, something between a human scream and a beast's growl. But Alex did not turn around. He carried his daughter toward the light, away from this darkness and gloom. Alex carried Emily along a narrow stone corridor, lighting the way with a flashlight. The girl was shaking in his arms as if in death throes. Her thin fingers were not even able to hold on to him. Heavy steps were heard behind them. Gabriel came to his senses, climbed out of the crypt, and pursued them. "You can't run away, Mr. Blake." His voice rang out, filling the corridor with a booming echo. "This place is older than you think. It lives, it breathes. You will forever remain a part of it." Alex quickened his pace, but the passage ahead began to narrow sharply. The ceiling became lower, and the walls became narrower, as if trying to crush them. He realized that he was walking into a trap. He stopped, looking around. Gabriel stood a few meters away, his head bowed as if studying him. "Why are you doing this?" Alex asked, trying to buy time. The priest smiled. "It's not me. I'm just a vessel." "A vessel for what?" Gabriel took a step forward, and his shadow began to twist strangely on the walls. You think you know what evil is? His voice changed, became deeper, as if it were not one person speaking, but several at once. In your mind and the world you live in, evil is just the actions of small people like you. In reality, it is a huge force that lives in the blood, in the bones. It is in the earth itself, and no one can stop it. He raised his hand, and Alex saw how his fingers lengthened, clawed and black, as if burnt. When I came here, I was an ordinary man, an ordinary shepherd. I did not know what awaited me below, under this church. Gabriel bowed his head, the smirk gone. But he knew. He was waiting for me. Who is he? The priest smiled, showing teeth, long and pointed, not like human teeth. Ha, ya ha ha ha, ho ho. You are interested. Be patient, and you will soon see him with your own eyes, but it will be your last look. I have done everything. 6 months, 6 children, and the 6th day of the rising moon. Today everything will happen, the ritual will be completed, and darkness will fill this world. He rushed forward. Alex jumped to the side, shielding Emily with his body. Gabriel moved unnaturally fast. He hit Alex in the chest, knocking him off his feet. The lantern rolled across the floor, spattered with blood. Pain shot through Alex's body, but he did not let himself fall. Gabriel swung the knife, aiming for his throat. Alex grabbed his wrist, trying to deflect the blade. They struggled in the darkness, their breaths mingling, their footsteps echoing dully in the dungeon. Gabriel was stronger than he looked. They rolled across the floor, smashing into the walls. The knife came down, cutting through Mr. Blake's clothes, leaving a long gash down his side. He gritted his teeth and gathered all his strength, pushing Gabriel away with his foot. The priest flew back, hitting the wall. Alex wasted no time. He managed to grab the first piece of wood he could find and plunged it into the priest's chest. Gabriel cried out, not from pain but from rage. You think this will stop me? He hissed, wrapping his arms around the protruding piece of wood. Alex pulled the knife from the holster on his belt. Let's check it out, and plunged the blade straight into Gabriel's eye. The priest roared, arching his back in an unnatural position. His body shook, and black viscous liquid gushed from his eye socket. The stone walls shook. Alex grabbed Emily and ran away, leaving the screaming monster behind. He ran down the corridor, hearing the earth shake behind him, the walls crumbling, raining ash down on his head. But he didn't stop, because the exit seemed so close. At the same time, the sheriff of the city of Stonehap was on duty and patrolling the silent streets. It was the dead of night. The lights in the houses had long gone out, and there was not a soul around. He always observed such a picture, but today, passing by the church, the wide open doors and a suspicious noise somewhere in the distance confused him. The sheriff decided to stop and check if everything was okay. At first he thought that he had imagined it all and that they had simply forgotten to close the doors to the church. But as he came a little closer, the barely audible noise became louder and louder. He came closer to the altar, where the loud sound was coming from, and took out his gun. His hands were shaking, because during the entire service he had never had to shoot anyone. There was not even a reason to take it out of the holster, but not today. The sheriff saw a passage down and began to go down. What opened before his eyes shocked him, and he literally froze in place. Mr. Blake, seeing the sheriff, began to shout, "Help, I beg you, help!" The sheriff ran to meet him. "I beg you, take her away from here and call for backup. I will try to delay him as long as I can," he said and handed Emily into his hands. But Gabriel was already nearby. Then Alex decided to try another way to stop him, at least for a while. He pulled wooden torches out of the walls and crossed them with each other, and began to read a prayer out loud without stopping for a moment. The priest began to slow down little by little. but the sounds that came from him were not at all like anything that even remotely resembled a person in front of him. His body began to twitch and sway sharply from side to side. The sheriff was almost pulling the girl out, and then Mr. Blake pulled a lighter out of his pocket, lit the wooden cross he had improvised, and threw it at the Holy Father. Gabriel's robes instantly caught fire, and he began to burn alive. Alex, following the sheriff, climbed up. They closed the passage, moving the altar back into place. The wild sounds were still coming from below, but with time they became quieter and quieter. 10 minutes later, the entire police force of the city was near St. Michael's Church. The ambulance that arrived on the scene urgently took Emily to the hospital. The girl was very exhausted and had lost a lot of blood, but nevertheless the doctors calmed her father, who was beside himself with worry, and said that she was in good hands. After the medics left, Mr. Blake and the police, led by the city sheriff, returned to the altar. They hoped that Father Gabriel was finished and dead, but they had to make sure of it. So they moved the altar and went down again. After carefully examining everything, none of them found the body of the Holy Father, as if he had simply disappeared. Only a burnt spot on the floor and nothing more. This moment greatly alarmed Alex, but remembering everything he had seen that night, this strangeness no longer seemed too unreal, and he decided to leave, allowing the police to do their job and not interfere. A week later, Emily felt much better and was discharged from the hospital. All this time, her parents did not leave her side for a single step. Alex and her daughter gave all the necessary statements to the sheriff, and the Blake family left. Emily was silent for most of the ride, but then she suddenly started shaking violently and screaming. Sarah tried to calm her down, because after what this little girl had been through, this phenomenon was not surprising. In a split second, she calmed down and said, "Dad, he's still alive. I can feel him." Alex gripped the steering wheel. For a few seconds, his eyes turned black as darkness itself. She said what he already knew.